around for that, and we want to encourage a little bit of networking after the event. Alrighty. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dan Rodriguez.
Thank you. The Q&A is always better over drinks, so we'll do that out there. I'm not going to talk too much about CCG. We're an analytics services company, and we have a few products in the market. I know you guys are here to talk about Azure and to talk about what we're seeing in the marketplace and what we're helping our clients with and some of the challenges that they're overcoming. But before we dive into the technology, I did want to touch on just a couple table setting components to why the technology is changing and what's happening in the marketplace. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of the disruption that's happening and what opportunities that's creating for all of us. Obviously, we're going to go through, Cherian's going to go through kind of the traditional architectures, through the modern architectures, touch on quite a few Azure topics. It'll be in the 100 to 200 level as much as we can get into the weeds tonight, but obviously we're more than happy to talk at length about this stuff. And then I'll do a brief wrap up at the end, and hopefully if we have time, Cherian wants to do a little demonstration and show some things. Please, at the end of this, Stephen's going to say it at the end also, but please send us feedback. We've done about a dozen of these in Tampa, the DAM events, and they've continued to grow, and all the content that we discuss is from feedback from you guys and what you're interested to hear. These are normally a lot more technical than a typical type of event. It's no sales. It should be all about sharing knowledge and encouraging the community to learn more about analytics, and whether it's for their personal career or for their jobs and for their organizations. So that's as much as I'll talk about us. We're so excited you guys are here. So there is a disturbance right now, and it's been happening for years, and while it's not the Death Star, it is really impactful, and it's all around this digital disruption that's happening. And so the big components to that, you hear all these amazing stats around, in the last X months, we've created 95% of all data that's been created since, or that's been stored digitally since the beginning of time. So data generation is massive. So we know that that's happening, and the bigger part of it is the data is also more complex. It's unstructured, it's structured, it's real time, it's batch. There's all these different components, and at the heart of everyone's digital transformation is really driving analytics. And analytics is so much bigger than BI, than reporting, and than dashboards. It's really about putting data in the hands of your operational users, and sometimes in your executives to make better decisions. So this is what's fueling the change. Some fun stats about the change. So since 2000, and this is actually 3 years old, I'll show you a little more updated one, but 52% of the companies that were in the top 500 are no longer in existence. Now there's some consolidation in there, but there's a lot of bye-bye. We all know the stories of the Kodaks and the other guys that couldn't keep up, the Blockbusters, and these guys that didn't try to thrive in a digital transformation, that either didn't believe in it or physically couldn't change. So this is real, this is very impactful. This one's fun because it talks about the average lifespan of organizations. It used to be 67 years, now it's 15 years. And by 2020, or in the 2020s, 75% of companies in the Fortune 500 will be new. So I don't think these slides are as necessary anymore because everyone understands the impact of what's happening. And companies like Netflix, Uber, these are 3 Microsoft companies because we are a Microsoft group. But these companies have effectively changed a very, very stable industry. Phones, that was a very stable industry, and now it's completely changed. The way you sign documents, which was a very standard way of doing business, a very standard way, has changed. The Amazons, the Jets, they've changed retail. So the point of this is massive industries that are very stable and have large organizations that have been very effective have been completely disrupted and changed. And right now, the largest vehicle company, the largest retailer of Alibaba, and the largest travel organization in Airbnb, none of them own physical assets for what they sell. So think about that. If you would have explained to someone 25 years ago that the 3 biggest organizations in those industries are not going to actually own any of their product, you would have been laughed at. And a lot of what they do and a lot of what our clients ask us is, how do we compete with our digital competitors? And it's a big difference when you start digital. Because now your data, in theory, even though we still have those guys, the data is integrated and it is coming through a data-first mentality, where the traditional organizations didn't have that. Data was an afterthought. We've all dealt with the ERPs and the CRMs and the other systems where data, for an analysis standpoint, was an afterthought. But all of these are also based on the cloud, right? They're taking advantage of cloud or hybrid cloud environments to really accomplish things that were impossible to accomplish before. So before we dive into the tech, and we're talking about digital transformation, it's important to remember that this is a team effort. So when we think about tech and what impacts technology or what impacts data, we have customers, we have ecosystems, we have IoT now, we have data coming from things, we obviously have our systems, and all of those come together for intelligence, but it spans this huge spectrum of people now that have to be involved. And for a long time, we've been talking about the importance, and CCG stands for Convergence Consulting Group. We named ourselves Convergence in 2002 because we saw the age-old challenge of business and IT needing to converge to be productive. And so this is getting more and more important, and we're seeing organizational change from a structure standpoint. We're seeing center of excellence and competency centers and community of excellence, because now centralized is no longer popular, so we want to decentralize. We're seeing all these changes come to play, and all of us have a role here. And today we're talking a lot about data and analytics, but the other one highlighted is business, because they have to be at the table. So I'll leave you before we dive into the tech, and remembering that, well, look at this color change. It looks nice with purple. Remembering that we always talk about 4 pillars. You have to think about people. You have to start with people. That's how you're going to be productive, and that's how you're going to be successful. The right kind of people, the right kind of organizational structure to handle not only ad hoc exploration and all the cool things that we want to do with big data and unstructured data and have fun and discover new things, but to also be able to handle traditional analytics and kind of CFO stuff. We have to have better processes. We have to have new processes. The old way of doing things no longer are as timely as they need to be. So that's why you see such a mad push for Agile and Scrum and Kanban and some of these manufacturing type methodologies that are really impacting. DevOps is a big one. Then of course we have technology, and we're going to talk a lot about that tonight. That's important, but so many people get wrapped around technology and want to hit the easy button. Oh, we got problems, let's go buy more technology and that'll solve the problems. And that's not what's going to solve it. You need new technology in a lot of cases. You should take advantage of the modern capabilities, but if you're not surrounding it with people and process, you're still going to struggle. And then lastly, of course, we have data. And we're shifting from collecting data and trying to get as much as we can to connecting data. And that's another capability that cloud is enabling, where we can leave data where it lives, and we can actually just draw connections to really get some insightful analysis. And all of that should be in the guise of how are we going to drive value? How are we going to drive insights? And that's where the business being involved from the get-go is really going to be important. Any questions? Does that sound good? Cool. All right, Cherian, let's talk tech.
All right, you guys can hear me all right? All right, so what I wanted to cover is actually, kind of start with what a traditional BI architecture is by showing you a sample diagram of like what I put together in Visio. So what you have here is a SQL server. I mean, you can actually, let's see if this, okay. So you can actually see a bunch of operational data sources that you have on your local on-prem server, multiple data sources coming from different systems. You have traditional SQL servers, you have data warehouse servers, you have SSAS, analysis services server, you have SSRS reporting server, you have web app hosting servers, and of course the medium of getting the data out. When you look at this architecture, what you can see is, of course, you need to have people in place for getting the setup ready, right? Windows systems, you need to have SQL servers installed on top of it, you need to have patches, updates, upgrades, and have to constantly maintain the structures. So that's what this traditional BI reference model that I have. So let me go to the next option that what you can actually do in Azure. So it's more around like this particular diagram, right? So the one I was actually showing you in the diagram before was more of like this physical SQL server where you own the hardware, you own the softwares, and there are environments where you own a massive server where you might have a bunch of virtual machines on top of it that's actually kind of loaded with, like, again, you will end up doing the same kind of work like SQL Server. You have to install SQL Server, you have to install SSAS, SSRS, reporting, whatever that is, and still have to maintain all that. Now, you can actually lift and shift this to Azure or any other cloud service provider where you're doing the same. Again, you have virtual machines, you have to have Windows installed as well as maintained, SQL Server. But what Azure offers in cloud is something called Azure Database, SQL Database, which you don't need to worry about getting an operating system and installing the SQL software on top of it, or any of those kind of administrative work is actually kind of not needed at this point. So benefits are like less administration, scalability. This one with the Azure SQL models actually has the capability of you can actually scale up and scale down as you are using the resources. Pay-as-you-go model, faster deployments, and as I mentioned before, no operating systems. Backups are done by default, and development continues pretty much without any kind of major changes that I can show you with some of demos that I have lined up, so hopefully I can actually get to that. Now, over here is pretty much the same diagram that I had shown you guys with the first slide, except I changed out some of the components sorry, my bad. A couple of components you can actually see Azure SQL Database, SQL Data Warehouse, Data Lake Store, Analysis Services, Web App, and Power BI, and other applications. So this architecture kind of, you no longer have the Windows, or you don't even have to have any kind of administrative staff looking after your Windows patches, SQL servers, and such. So that's what this model is setting you up with. And the following slides, I will be going a bit more detail on what a SQL database is, a SQL data warehouse is, and analysis services, and what are the offerings there. So having an environment like this, like when you are moving into this Azure architecture with this, rather than just putting everything on a VM, the benefit you are getting is you're actually getting set up for next level of analytics, which is like streaming analytics, and so like what I have here. Stream analytics, event hubs, you can actually, your environment is now getting ready for machine learning, data lake analytics, and everything to be reported out of BI. Or you have a web hosting server or any kind of application server that's hosting everything out. So that's pretty much where your future is actually taking to, or even you are there already. But so that's what I have there. Now, let's talk a little bit about what SQL database and SQL data warehouse. So basically start with SQL database. So the way the SQL database it's actually priced in Azure is actually something called a DTU, database transaction unit. So pretty much, you can actually, you have 3 different tiers, basic, standard, and premium tier offerings, what Azure actually has on this SQL. The DTU is nothing but processing power. So pretty much, it's actually a combination of a CPU, memory, disk, read and write. So the more DTU you have, it's going to be a bit more powerful on handling or moving the data across. But again, you're paying more for those services. But of course, you can actually get the DTU up. You can actually set up that DTU set up to have something like with the 50 DTU, try it out, and if it doesn't work, you can actually scale it down as well. So that flexibility is there, and as your application progresses, you can actually, or as your environment, as you administer those environments, you know how or what needs to have more for performance sakes and all that. You can actually adjust the levels. Now, each database is in your environment. You may have application databases. You may have operations, analytics. I mean, any kind of particular, any variety of databases are possible in your environment. So, in order to set up every database with 100 DTU or 500 DTU, it's actually going to be not cost effective. So they have a concept here called elastic DTU. What it does is, pretty much you can actually buy up a pool of elastic DTUs, and that elastic DTUs will let you have a pool of your databases. You can actually have it part of that elastic DTU. So for instance, during the daytime, if your daily operations databases are actually getting kicked up, it can actually utilize the elastic DTU's storage power. And during the nighttime, when the daily operations comes down, your nightly processes kick in. Those databases, if it is also part of that same elastic DTU, it can actually utilize that that processing powers. The benefit, I mean, the cost factor is there. This is actually 1.5 times more than what a regular DTU will cost. What benefits is, rather than just having that DTU on each individual databases, you can actually have each of your SQL Server databases set up with like 50 DTUs and maybe have a pool of 500 DTU that will be shared across like maybe 10 databases, and that's how you can actually utilize this particular pool or this particular capability in Azure. And again, you know, the deal is like, you know, basic, standard, premium. I mean, you know, they have different tiers on this elastic DTU as well. Now, when we talk about you know, the benefits, I mean, obviously you need to keep an eye on like, hey, what are the limitations as well. SQL database on the top tier, premium tier, currently offers only up to 4 terabytes of storage. There is a way to overcome it is by actually introducing sharding, what they call it like a horizontal scaling out mechanism. So that's one way to do that. Again, implementing, I mean, you know, once you have that set up and implemented, you could actually have multiple databases hosting the same set of, you can actually overcome that 4 terabyte limitation at that point. Now, Azure is also coming out with something called Azure Managed SQL Server Instance. So it's actually in preview, so I couldn't actually play around with that yet. One of the cool things I heard about it is the fact that you can actually, it actually has some of the limitations which SQL Server database currently has, is like SQL CLR functions, SQL Server agents, and cross-database querying. All those are going to be resolved by the time a managed instance comes online, which kind of helps us with you know, most of the you know, on-premises, right? You might be cross-querying across multiple databases and such. So hopefully that will, once that comes alive, you know, we might be able to get around those kind of limitations what you have in current SQL database. Now, speaking of Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Now, this is the enterprise data warehouse solution, what Microsoft actually has for any BI, big data solutions. Basically, it has a technology called massively parallel processing, which kind of has the capability of like, you know, running across like petabytes of data across like, you know, different. So basically, this is actually the solution where you have data data stored from like, you know, your Hadoop solutions. It might be on your data factory, data lake store. So it actually it has the capability of like using Polybase to pull out those data out of those file stores and kind of process it and serve it up for any kind of presentation layer. Now, looking a little bit more into their structure, as SQL database, I was actually talking about when SQL database, the computation is actually done in DTU and eDTU. Over here, the concept is slightly different. It's DWU, data warehouse units. Essentially, this is what their the massively parallel processing capability in Azure is actually in Azure Data Warehouse is being gained by the fact that, you know, it has like a control and node mechanism. So it has a control node, it has a compute node, and it has the storage layer. So the way it works is applications actually will provide the instructions of what to be queried into the control node, and the compute node will actually go against the storage node and kind of process the data and brings it back up. Now, each control node has about 60 of those storage, storage components in there. The way the cost is assumed is like this way. So if you have like a 100 DW unit, so you have one control node handling one compute node, and that one compute node is actually dealing with all your 60 data partitions that you have in your system. Now, if you add like 400 DEW, your cost is going to go up. Same control node, but you have 4 compute nodes that's going to handle your 60 data partitions, which controls about like 15 data partitions at each control node. Essentially, that's how it divides up. So no matter what, at any point, it's actually 60 partitions. And you can actually go up to the premium top tier, which offers about DW 6,000 DW. So that actually offers so you have 60 control nodes, compute nodes at that point, handling each of those distributions. Now the storage, when we talk about each individual storage, how the data needs to be handled and process it back to the compute, it is called distributions. So there is like 3 forms of distributions that the Azure DW data warehouse actually uses. Hash, round robin, and replicated. So round robin is actually the simplest one. Pretty much, if you have like staging tables, like you want to just load and dump the data. So it actually takes and loads of data into each individual databases one by one, and then kind of you can use it for like the rest of the processes. Now you can actually define your fact tables with like a hash. So hash is actually kind of something that offers a higher performance and like kind of for joins and aggregations and all that. So definitely fact tables or any kind of big large tables will be benefiting out of that hash kind of storages actually. And then there's replicated, which is pretty much what happens is each compute node will have a copy of that particular table, whatever that table is. Now the challenge is, as long as the table is less than 2 gigabytes, or for small reference data sets, it's actually good to use replicated. But otherwise, depending on your data needs and this kind of spools into, you can actually choose what that model should be once you get to do that model. Now, just to show some of the distributions in like a pictorial representation, right? Hash uses like a hash table to so something similar to like the sharding effect, kind of pushes the data that way. You have your round robin, and then that's the replicated where it actually kind of copies across all individual nodes. Now, when we talk about the differences between Azure SQL database, Azure SQL data warehouse, and also the SQL database that you have in your on-prem, right? So traditionally, when we installed operational databases or OLTP and Mathew, for instance, as well as like for dimensional modeling, OLAP instances, use the same software. Like you use the same SQL Server install. You install it on like a couple of on your front-end application as well as for your data warehousing installs. That's pretty much what we have or what we had in the past. Now, Azure SQL database is actually their OLTP offerings, so that's why the ladder limitation of 4 terabytes, and it's actually made for more updates and inserts. Versus SQL data warehouse is their OLAP offering, which actually kind of is geared more for querying the data results as well as for providing you with faster reports and responses as well. So, and the concept of SQL Server in Azure, so that's another thing, right? When you go, you will see in your portal Azure SQL Server. So it's actually nothing but a folder or a kind of a conceptual package where you can actually keep all your individual databases, all your individual SQL databases as part of that grouping. So it's kind of a grouping mechanism that they have in Azure. So that's there. The logical grouping, right? So now over here is a small cheat sheet of hey, what is SQL database, SQL data warehouse? As you can see, there is a limitation on 4 terabyte. Yeah, by the time I speak, most likely it might have been lifted and changed because Azure is coming out with changes every week. So some of this information may be outdated, but as you can see, concurrent sessions, you can have about 30,000 concurrent sessions on a SQL database versus on a SQL data warehouse, 1024. And so backup and recoveries are, that's, by the way, it's backup and recovery is kind of, as I mentioned in the earlier slides, kind of by default, Azure actually will do it for you behind the scenes. Now, moving into a bit more interesting stuff, which is the Azure Data Factory and SSIS. So most of the people here are familiar with these tool sets that you use in the current environment, right? Like Azure, SQL, SSIS, and such. So Azure Data Factory. So basically, that's where you create your it's an integration service that's being provided by Microsoft in Azure for moving your data, transforming your data. You can actually schedule your Hadoop processing, semi-structured, structured data, machine learning, it's actually a scheduler with a lot of capabilities built in. Now, the more interesting thing I have is the version 2, which is what I have a demo around, where you can actually deploy SSIS packages to it, and that will so if you have SSIS packages on-prem, up until now, some of the transformations offered in Data Factory, I mean, it would take a lot of time to get into like JSON programming and all that to move that data around. But now that you have your SSIS packages, you can actually deploy it there and have it run in this medium, and kind of gets a lot of pain out of our developers' head. So before getting to the SSIS demo, you can actually get the Azure feature pack, get it installed in your SSIS install. That will provide you with a bunch of control flow, data flow, as well as some of the connection managers for Azure. As you can see, you can actually connect to your blob storage, HD Insights, your data lake store, as well as the connection parameters are right there for those things. Let's move on to the demo. All right, so how am I doing on the time? Okay, not bad, right? So what I have here is a very simple package, and for the interest of time, I just didn't want to complicate things. So before going to the package, let me head to my screen orientation is just fine.
Can I ask a question before you move into the demo?
Sure.
Like, you had a slide with VCO diagram on it.
Yeah.
And it has Power BI connecting to analytics services, and then going to the Azure SQL. Do you always need to have the analytics service in, or you can connect directly to the?
It can connect directly to the SQL server instance, actually. I mean, again, diagram is actually just for reference only, but if you start drawing, it will be like that AT&T singular merge. It's like all around this. You can directly
do it.
Okay. All right. So one more thing that I need to be out there is sorry, what's taking me long is the orientation on the screen. Get my SQL. So let me. All right. So over here, what you are seeing is my Azure portal, where I have a couple of resources ready, and let me show you my data lake store. So I can navigate to my data store, data explorer, and I have a demo folder here. So I have a file here. What I'm going to do is, since this is my demo, what I wanted to do is, I'm going to move a file from my local system up to Azure using SSIS. So let me go ahead and delete this particular file. so that's easier and faster. All right, so now back to my SSIS package. So package, lock it to Azure. So over here, what I have is actually a task that I'm going to copy the file named nationaltest.txt out to my Azure account. And what that also is going to do is I have a SQL instance that's been set up in Azure. That's the connections parameters that you are seeing there. And in order to connect to that SQL instance, definitely you can actually use your existing SQL Server Management Studio. You just have to provide the connection parameters of whatever that is, and then you can actually connect to that, which I haven't connected and logged here. So here's the table. Let me just wonderful. So just need to make sure that's that should be getting me back on. All right, so I have this particular table is actually populated currently with data, and what it is going to do is just truncate. So this table right now should. All right, so right now what it's going to do is, so it's going to upload that one file to Azure Data Lake, and then it's going to use this data flow task to get data from that data lake store. I have a file already there that's going to get that data file and then get it loaded into my Azure SQL database instance. So let me just run it and run it with this IP first. So let's see. So if I press this folder, I should be able to see one more file that came in. So that's one of the local files that's got uploaded to my Azure account. Now, if I move back to my SQL instance, you should be able to see some data in this table. There you go. So it's a basic package. What it does was just loaded up a file up to Azure and then kind of used one of my files in Azure to populate this table back. Now, I also have this package, actually not this package, I have another package that's deployed in my data factory. What it does is it actually copies data from this table and kind of copies into the secondary table here, which is the test table, which I'm just fine. So I don't have any data here. Now let me go to my data factory because I deployed that particular package to my Azure Data Factory, which definitely you can actually get. Let me get to it by going through my resource groups. All right, I don't think I need to panic. Okay, let's see. Logging up. All right, going to my resource group and demo. Easy way to find where my data factory is, so here it is. And if I go to this, it will open up my data factory portal. And over here, I already did this. I have the package here. There might be different ways to do it, but one way I did was executing it as a stored procedure. Pretty much you will activate your integration runtime here, and once that integration runtime is running, you can actually connect to it using your SQL Server Management Studio, like the way I have it connected here. Then you will actually get the integration services catalog, and over here you can actually see the packages I have. Let me just Alright. So with version 2 of Data Factory, as I mentioned earlier, you are getting the integration services catalog, and you can actually come and deploy the package here. Once the package is deployed, I'm actually back in the Data Factory, where this stored procedure is actually kind of defined to kick off the SSIS package. So yeah, so pretty much that's defined in there, that which package, which server to hit and get that package. Now, in order to execute that package, all I have to do is I just have to hit the trigger, or you can actually schedule the trigger, but for now I'm just going to do a trigger. And then finish, and I can actually monitor the activity over here in progress. I should be able to see one more coming out. Yeah, so this is actually in progress. While that's in progress, you can actually go back into your SQL Server Integration Services catalog, and you can actually check for, I don't think active operations will bring it back, but Integration Services dashboard. So I have one that's coming in, 2 succeeded, that's from my previous run, so hopefully one is still running, so you can see that status actually getting updated. 3 succeeded, thank God, at least that didn't fail. So coming back into this table, right? This is one of the table that actually kind of is getting data from the table 1 to this test table. Now if you execute it, yeah, we go, the data is there. Hallelujah. So all right, so you know, what I was actually kind of trying to show here is, like, you know, you can actually use your, your existing knowledge on your SQL Server, your SSIS package, and, you know, lift and shift up to your Azure. Pretty much when you're connecting to your on-premises databases, right? You are connecting to like 10.1. Whatever that is. Instead, over here, it's actually going to be that named instance, like cmdemo sql.database.windows.com, and then tie up with your Azure account. Now back into the presentation. Now we know to do this. Alright, so that's what I wanted to do there. And now let's talk about some of our additional other components that you had seen in that initial picture that I had up there. Azure Analysis Services. So Azure Analysis Services is actually the tabular cube offerings that Microsoft has in their cloud offering. They currently don't have multi-dimensional cube or the data mining cube capabilities in Azure, which is one thing I worked with a lot in the past, but you know, tabular is actually faster, easier, and thanks to one of my friends here who actually kind of helped me out with learning and understanding tabular more. So pretty much, you know, so tabular is the only offering that Azure actually has currently, and when I spoke to Microsoft folks, they were like, yeah, we have plans to bring it in flight at some point for the multidimensional, and so I don't know whether that's going to happen, but that's what I've been told so far. Now, you can actually pause. So one of the ways to, of course, when you have this instance up there and running, it's gonna incur cost. So it has the capability of you can actually pause the instance and you can schedule it to be running during the work hours, and off hours you can actually have it turned off, or kind of pause the instance so you will not incur cost on running that service over there in Azure. And you should be able to easily migrate your data from your local on-prem to the Azure once you have your on-prem gateway installed, which is something I have that I can actually explain what that is. Now for reporting, I had shown you the Power BI. Power BI is nothing but a way of visualizing your data, what you have in your SQL Server. It could be tabular data, or it could be from your SQL Server database. And then on-prem, you need to have an on-prem gateway if you have data in your local that needs to be serviced up to the Power BI. So when the picture over here, you can actually see what I would try to do is here. There's two reports here. One is actually connected to my local tabular instance. The other one is actually connected to my Azure tabular instance. That's all it takes. I mean, pretty much everything else kind of works flawlessly. Now I have one more demo that's actually for those two components. Let me duplicate my screen.
So do you see advantage in having a multi-dimensional big model versus tabular?
It's one of the industry's challenging questions though. How many times do you have?
Well, so I mean, multi-dimensional right now is not available in the cloud, so that's one reason to go tabular. But I mean, they're very different, right? Multi-dimensional is row storage, tabular is columnar storage, and it's in memory. So tabular 3, 4, 5 years ago, it came out in SQL Server 2012. When it first came out, the challenge was, I need a lot of space, or a lot of memory, because it's going to put everything in memory. And so the debate then was, do I want to use more commodity-based hardware and do where the disks aren't as important and do columnar type analysis, or am I looking to do more row type analysis? And that needs to be multidimensional, and then I/O was a bigger concern, because it was about disks and I/O. They run on different engines, or at least when they were originally developed, tabular was on hex velocity, which was a columnar in-memory storage trying to compete with that type of structure for analysis. So when you're doing heavy, a lot of data warehousing is heavy column analysis, and so tabular solves that, and that's the biggest driver for why they went in that model today. If the performance of that doesn't reach specific use cases, then they'll probably bring multidimensional to the cloud. But right now, performance, when you go tabular, as long as you're in a reasonable workload, and with Power BI, you can go public. So the traditional 999 a month, and then you have access, and it's obviously shared. It's a multi-tenant shared environment. But if you go to Power BI Premium, you actually get allocation of your own environment. And depending on the number of users you have, it supports all of that. And we don't have performance problems. And obviously, if you're using HD Insights or any of the big data platforms, then that's a different type of querying that Power BI utilizes. And with Polybase, you can connect both of the different types of data storages. And we don't have performance problems. And with the latest update of Power BI and Tabular, they're doing what's called aggregate. They do aggregate cache storage. So the example that they're demoing now is they have 1 trillion rows of data, and they're caching the aggregates on that data so that you can do high-level analysis. But if you want to drill in and go pull up 50 rows, you can also drill down and go and get the 50 rows. So you can do the high-level analytics like you would do in a more dashboarding type of environment. And if you still want to get down to details, you can. Now, granted, when you go to details, it takes 45 seconds to come back versus the 1 second. But we don't have performance problems with Tabular in Azure.
Is it similar to what Click does?
It is. Click has a different process because Click has its own.
They do the caching.
They do the caching, but they also have their own integration process. And with a lot of our clients that use Click, they have to do ETL, and then they also have to bring it all into Click and kind of pre-cache it. And that pre-caching takes a lot of time. And so we end up with a lot of challenges with those clients when they're trying to do some real-time type scenarios, and Click Sense is more their cloud solution to try to help solve some of that. But, yes, from an in-memory standpoint, it's similar, technology underneath for the in-memory piece. I don't know if that helped or if I just.
No, I think this was a good explanation.
But again, in your environment, you still have multi-dimensional, right? And you want it to be in Azure. Obviously, spin out a VM, have a service instance installed on it, and you can still gain the multi-dimensional capabilities that you are.
The reason I was asking is because when we start talking about streaming analytics, then with a multi-dimensional cube, you have to define that, right? So if you are constantly receiving, a real-time data set, you don't know what's coming in, then how would you tackle that?
Yeah.
So my question was, which methodology is better going forward, tabular versus multi-dimensional?
For streaming, I don't know that either one of those are really gonna accomplish what you want out of this. If you're looking for real-time streaming of unknown data, then obviously you're gonna have to use streaming event hubs, and you're gonna be using data lake and either machine learning or other types of technologies to actually mine that data to bring something back.
Like I was thinking, if you have something pushed into Splunk, right, where you have real-time machine data coming in, and then you're identifying just a pattern, like maybe detecting an anomaly or something, then you don't know which type of data you're receiving. Right?
Yeah, if you're doing schema on read, then you're gonna be doing a whole different piece. Because both tabular and multidimensional are gonna require you to understand the model before you're going after it. But if you're doing a schema on read where you're gonna determine what the data looks like as you pull it out, then you're in a different, a third way of doing things.
Thanks for explaining.
Yeah.
For sure. All right, so what I wanted to show you here is definitely connected to my tabular instance, which right now, this is actually my local tabular instance, and this is my AdventureWorks tabular cube. And this is actually connected to my Azure instance of that tabular cube, and where I have the cube and the place to name it like just AdventureWorks. So then, so in order to connect to it, obviously you can actually use your Management Studio, and then for a tool set like Power BI, so I have Power BI desktop installed. So this particular cube is right now connected to my local instance. So as you can see, it's actually connected to my CCG, Mathew, this particular laptop, and AdventureWorks Internet Sales is the cube. And definitely it's a functioning data set. You can see how this moves around, works. So it's the same cube, the same report. What I did was I actually have the one on the Azure. Yeah, this is an Azure version. And the data source is just changed to the Azure and connecting to that AdventureWorks cube that I have out there. And definitely the functionality wise, definitely does the same. So basically you can actually continue with your development on your local and push it out to Azure for other customers to consume the data back. Now back into my presentation. I also mentioned something about the on-premises gateway. So there is this component that you can actually install on your local data. So if you have data coming from SQL Server, your on-prem other data sources like files, file shares and such, and you wanted to have it brought out to analysis services or Power BI app, you have a two component install that needs to be done. One is actually an on-premises data gateway that will be installed on your on-prem server, wherever that data resides. And on your Azure portal, you need to just have that avail the service of like that on-premises data gateway. So that kind of facilitates, like kind of secure the data between moving the data from your local on-prem up to the cloud actually. Some instructions on like how to get that set up. So the PowerPoint deck I think will be available after the meeting, or it's available right now. So you guys can actually take a look at what these are and or how to get that set up. Now, during the meeting, I also, I didn't demo this Azure Storage Explorer, but I think by now most of you guys actually know what that is. I can show you that. I have it on my laptop as well. So you can, basically what that does is you can actually, it's another install. You download, install on your local. And you connect that with your Azure account, and what it does help you is you can actually look up your folders, data structures in data lake store, or your blob store or whatever. You can actually drag and drop, upload the files there using that particular tool set. Azure Feature Pack, SSIS Azure Feature Pack, that's what brings you the components that needs to have connectivity to Azure capabilities. Then the on-premises gateway, as I mentioned in the slide before, for moving the data for Power BI and Azure. Now, one of the other things that when you work with all different industries, they have like the compliance and regulations and all those aspects. Now, I was actually in the healthcare IT for the last 5 years, and HIPAA, HITRUST, all those were the keywords that the companies were like worried about. They want to make sure their systems are ready for it. Of course, Azure is HIPAA, HITRUST compliant, and the recent European GDPR regulation that's coming up, I think by May or something like that. So Azure is actually compliant for that too, but it all depends on us to implement and get that set and rolling. Now, there are links to some of these additional stuff like transparency, where's your data, how is it secured, so if you want some information about like how Azure does it, the links are in the PowerPoint. Azure Government is actually kind of their wing that offers services to the government entities. And then Azure Industries to learn about like how it's actually being done in the current industry right now, what are the business cases and such.
So can I ask about the HIPAA compliance? So when you say it's HIPAA compliant, what do you mean by that?
The systems are secure enough to hold your PIA information, and then if you want to.
All I can tell you, because I'm definitely not a security expert, but all I can tell you is that HIPAA has requirements for if you're going to store information in the cloud for specific capabilities it has to pass. Now I know for sure the easy buttons from a security standpoint is by default when you install Azure SQL Server in a PaaS environment, platform as a service, it turns on automatically encryption at rest. And it also supports encryption in motion. So from a pure just, are we encrypting our data and are we storing it, and when we move it from one place to another through Azure Data Factory, is it secure the whole time? Then that matches all HIPAA compliance. Now you can go in and do very dumb things or innocent things that can break all of that. But HIPAA has very specific requirements, and when we do cloud versus AWS versus Azure comparisons for clients, the one thing that Azure always wins on is regulation and compliance. So they have more certifications. They're literally in almost 100 different certifications they have. And AWS may have 82. It's not like they have 10, one has 100. But there's massive amounts of effort that they're doing for regulatory compliance, and they do a lot of government and public sector. So obviously that industry, along with financial services, those are huge industries that are pushing them to have more and more compliance and regulatory certifications.
So if you are hosting a healthcare database in Azure environment, then you don't need to go through your own HIPAA auditing or anything, right? Because it's all hot.
I think they're still going to HIPAA audit the organization because there's things that you do with the data when you pull it out. But when they get to the storage piece and the infrastructure, they're going to hit the checkbox because of the Azure environment. As long as obviously you're following best practice. Like I said, you could still stand up a VM, put your own whatever database on there, and do whatever you want.
Or you could just download something and print it out while you're sleeping. It's nothing to do with it.
The biggest concern when you're doing these compliance kind of things is, as you mentioned in the past scenario, right, you've got what the customer, Microsoft customer is doing, you're still liable for all that, right? But when it comes to the infrastructure layer, there's always a question mark when you say PaaS or IaaS because you don't control that. Well, these certifications say that if you meet all the other requirements, Microsoft's got your back, we have this side, right? And I say we, I don't work for Microsoft, but that's what they're saying.
Cool. All right, so Azure, as you know, there's a lot of components out there. I mean, it's not easy to tackle them all at once. So if you want to read up on some of the components, what are the offerings in Azure, there's a link to that Azure 101. The portal looks kind of like that, so you can click on each individual tiles and kind of navigate and read through it, and kind of go with it. Service level agreements, link for that. Azure updates, basically, as I mentioned about the Data Factory version 2, hey, it came out. I mean, what are the new things, the new features? I mean, all that is actually being listed in this link, so we can actually go there. And then definitely if you are architecting a solution for a customer and you want to get some pricing information about hey, X plus Y plus Z, what is this going to cost? I mean, they have a pricing calculator that kind of breaks it down to on a daily basis and as well as a monthly basis what the cost will be. So, and with that, I would like to invite Dan back into the stage.
Yeah, I will. So I will do one small shameless plug to give you a real case example of how we use these with clients who are not currently on Azure. So we have two offerings. One's called Rapid Insights and one's called Rapid Dash. And in both of those, it's a 6-week kind of art of the possible proof of concept type of engagement where we come in 6 weeks, and I'll do Rapid Insights first. So Rapid Insights, we go in, we use Azure Data Factory to move some data that you have on-prem, whether it be a flat file. We typically try to not solve data problems in a 6-week engagement, so we take some snapshot of data if you have cloud platforms or on-prem, what have you. We move it into Azure Machine Learning, and we run a couple different algorithms on it to test and train a model, and then we expose that model through Power BI. And we do this over a 6-week period, very rapid. We do multiple iterations of the model until we get it to a point that we're happy with it. And the point of it is to show the client how quickly and easily with these cloud-enabled technologies you can pull data into an environment, run machine learning algorithms on top of it, and produce results. And typically across those 6 weeks, we consume somewhere between $100 and $500 worth of total consumption, depending on how big of the data we're going after. So it's really, really low impact, really small dollar amounts to move and do traditionally what would have taken a lot of effort just to stand up environments and stand up SaaS or stand up the R servers and do all these components, and we're doing those in minutes. So it really shows the power in Rapid Insights. And a Rapid Dash, very similar concept. The only difference is we're really focusing on Power BI. And we're doing a little bit more agile methodology in that one to show you how to kind of visually tell a story with Power BI and go from concept on the whiteboard to the boardroom and actually have the dashboard. But again, there's 6 weeks POCs where we can put a lot of data and do some really cool things, and we would have never been able to do those types of projects historically. And we support, I don't know how many Microsoft friends we have here, but we support lots of other technologies historically, and in all of those it would have said 6 weeks we should have your environment stood up, and then we'll start talking about what we want to do with it, right? Now in 6 hours we can have data loaded, a full environment ready and willing. So for all of you that are considering getting into Azure and playing around for very, very low cost, and most of all of their services have free trials, you can get in and do a lot of things. And the really cool thing about Microsoft, not only for our consultants but also for our clients, is the community is phenomenal. Every enhancement that they do to Power BI, which they push out enhancements every 2 weeks, every enhancement they do is driven through the community. And their head of product development has a dashboard that shows by likes. So when you go in the community, you can say, I wish you guys had this. I wish you had a Venn diagram, for example. And then other people can like it and thumb it up. And the product, the VP of product has a dashboard that he looks at every day that says what the top 5 features are that everyone's voting for, and those go into the development cycle. So it's amazing how fast they turn around. Every time I open Power BI, it says there's a new version, go download it. And every time I'm like, ooh, I wonder what's in this one. And it's amazing to me as a background in software development to think of how crazy it is, the concept that every couple of weeks you have a new version out there that has been regression tested, and all the old stuff still works, and all the new stuff works with it, and that's not going to cause everyone to stop and break in 7,000 phone calls. So it's really powerful how quickly you can get into this technology. So, again, if you're trying to get funding, some of these things that I'm going to talk about, these are helpful. But what we have right now is we have this paradox, right? We have this abundance of data and information, and we have such a scarcity of value and actionable insight. And that creates huge opportunity for most of us in the room. So you can see this was a Gartner slide. The data and the ability to analyze it is central to how firms compete. So they do a huge CIO survey every year, and they asked the CIOs, they had a list of about 20 technologies, and they said, pick the top 3 that are going to change your business. And you can see advanced analytics, so when we talk about machine learning, et cetera. You can see Internet of Things, digital security, and then some of the more edge things like blockchain and autonomous vehicles and so forth. But advanced analytics, 81%. So that's massive. And again, these are things that are going to change their organization over the next few years. And then lastly, what I'll say is, with scarcity equals opportunity. Almost last, I got one more. So in the same survey, when they asked CIOs, so what's your biggest inhibitor? It was skills. It was people. It was how are we going to get the right people with the right skills to overcome our challenges. So there's lots of people involved now. We have chief data officers because compliance is so important, because security around that data is so important. We have all new roles. We have chief data officers, and I don't know if it's up here, but there's also chief analytics officers right there that you'll see now that are more involved. Of course, we have data scientists. There's also a great stat that says over the next 3 years, that citizen data scientists, which is just a term for, I'm not actually certified and educated as a data scientist, but I've been given enough weapons to be dangerous, that I will produce more analytics than data scientists will. And the reason is there's a huge demand for data science and there's not enough supply. So business folks or traditional analysts are figuring out how to do this. And with tools like AML, Azure Machine Learning, you can be really powerful without that background. So skills, I can't say enough and emphasize how many of our clients work with us was cool, you're going to come do this stuff, but what do we do when you're done? How do we get our people up to speed? How do we take this over and how do we grow from there? So again, just to wrap it up, keep the holistic view in mind. The technology is important. There's 88 services right now in Azure, and that's probably outdated by the time I finish that sentence. They're changing at a ridiculous pace. It's a struggle for you guys, it's a struggle for us to keep up with everything, so we constantly are having to reinvent ourselves and relearn what the new services are doing, and they're constantly changing them, and they're constantly integrating, adding new ones, integrating, adding new ones. But don't just focus on that. Remember the people. Think about literacy. Think about culture. There's a fun new term, which is information as a second language. So all of us have some literacy in data. Whether it's your fantasy football league, whether you're watching the news and seeing stats coming up now, there's so many analytics that are being pushed. It's becoming a very normal part of our culture. But you have to build that literacy, that information as a second language. You have to build that within your organization and help people understand how to speak data. You can have the coolest analytics, the coolest insights, but if no one really gets it, then it won't be adopted. If it's not adopted, it's a fun project for IT or for whatever department did that. So we have to focus on people. We have to drive better processes, self-service, governance. These are huge topics that are becoming more and more important. Nobody wants to be Target. Nobody wants to be Uber. Nobody wants to be Facebook with Cambridge Analytica. Nobody wants to have these breaches and these challenges around governance and security changing their business with that kind of impact. So the good thing is, every one of these stories gives you another opportunity to go back and say, remember that story? Remember that governance thing I talked about? Let's revisit governance, or let's revisit security, because we don't want to be that company. And then lastly, focus on data. So that is it. That was our presentation. Please send feedback to danfeedback@ccgbi.com, or of course grab one of us and say this was awesome, this sucked, I'd love to hear more about this. But we really appreciate it. Stephen, you want to wrap us up? Sure. Oh yeah, you got prizes. The cool stuff.
Thanks, Dan. If you would